A proposed Illinois anti-tenant retaliation law would force landlords to prove that they are innocent and assume that they are guilty of retaliation. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today. It's coming out of the state of Illinois. So obviously I've already done a video about the proposed anti-tenant retaliation law that, is going towards these so-called landlords who are retaliating against tenants who ask for repairs or whatever, right? And so I told you what the problems were that I had with this law. I'm gonna have to reiterate that, but I also kept looking into the topic, and there is a person who wrote an article on the topic here in a nice format that's a little bit clearer than me. So, when I talk about these laws, sometimes I'm speaking of it as an outsider who is reading newspaper articles, and sometimes I get the facts wrong. Okay, so this is somebody who's from Illinois, who is a landlord, and they know more the ins and outs of the proposed law and exactly why it would affect landlords negatively. So that's why I'm going to bring this article up today. So yeah, this is a bad thing. As I've mentioned many times before, when it comes to these anti-harassment or anti-retaliation laws, right? It is very, very difficult to, prove that you aren't harassing somebody. So in the case of the Illinois law in particular, if a tenant asks for a repair and then after they get that repair, you decide that, hey, I need to increase the rent, well, that can be considered retaliation. Or if a tenant asks for a repair and then you need to evict that tenant, even if it's for non-payment of rent, that can be considered retaliation as well. And the only way that you can prove that's not the case is by taking the tenant to court. So you have to go out and hire a lawyer, pay them, thousands of dollars in order to prove your innocence. So yeah, this is a complete travesty of a law. It's very anti-landlord. I hate it. Okay, I absolutely hate it. And it fixes a problem that that already has laws that are written against it and isn't really a true issue. So yeah, it creates more of a burden, especially on small mom and pop landlords who own one or two or a few properties. Okay, so yeah, this is a nightmare. Okay, so before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. I've seen tenants post in my comment section before that, this landlord is harassing me, right? What do you consider to be harassment when it comes to landlord-tenant relationship? I don't think that it is harassment when a landlord asks a tenant who hasn't paid their rent to pay the rent, okay? I don't think it's retaliation when a tenant who has proven themselves to be a problem, you don't want to renew their lease, okay? That's not retaliation. That is a smart business decision. So deciding not to renew somebody's lease who, is constantly all the time, calling you for every little thing and, asking for stuff to be repaired that doesn't need to be fixed. I've had tenants like that before. And these are the kind of people I did not want to renew their lease, okay? So it shouldn't be considered retaliation. It's a smart business decision because you'll spend more time, more energy, and more money, trying to please these tenants sometimes than you will with any of, or maybe even all of your other tenants combined. These are the problem tenants is what I call them, okay? And yeah, retaliating, that's not what you're doing at all. You're just trying to make a smart business decision. It's kind of like if you owned a fast food joint and you had a customer come in there and they're like, okay, I want a extra value meal, and then you give them the extra value meal and they come in, they're like, well, there's not enough cheese on this, so you remake the burger, and then they're like, well, now you overcooked it, and then you got to remake it again, and then they're like, well, now the bun's a little bit hard, so you remake it a third time, right? And they finally are happy and they leave, right? And they come back and they want to play that game again, and you're like, no, I don't want you as a customer. I don't want you as a customer because you cause too many problems. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to get into this article. They're going to go over a bit of the details about this Illinois proposed law. This article is coming from AOL.com, and it says, your turn. Proposed law would make Illinois landlords guilty unless proven innocent. And let's hear what some of the people, on the ground in Illinois are saying. Innocent until proven guilty is a fundamental principle of America's justice system. but soon that may not be true in Illinois. Each year, there is an onslaught of legislation attacking housing providers. This year is no exception. HB 4768, the Landlord Retaliation Act, is working its way through the General Assembly. The title of the bill suggests a terrible wrong is being corrected. While there may be merit to the intent of the bill, the devil is in the details. The purpose of the legislation is to prevent a landlord from retaliating against a tenant who complains about property conditions. That behavior is already prohibited by law, but the advocates of this bill feel the existing law doesn't sufficiently punish landlords. Now, as I've mentioned many times before, a lot of these new laws and rules and regulations that they're creating, right, are to solve a problem that is, relegated to a very tiny percentage of landlords. So when you say, okay, well, there's these bad landlords who are doing X, Y, or Z, right? Well, what percentage of landlords are doing that? It's not 10%. It's not even 1%. It's like 0.01% of landlords are acting in this manner. Yet the 99.99% of landlords who are doing everything right, they get lumped in with this, the very few bad guys, and then they're spending hundreds or thousands of dollars trying to comply with these new laws. And that is exactly the sort of thing I'm fighting against. That's what I'm arguing against. That's why I don't like when they pass laws like this, okay? Because simply put, you're going to end up with good landlords who have to prove that, hey, their rent increase was justified or that their eviction of a tenant was justified. And the assumption is that you are guilty from the get-go. Meanwhile, the bad guys, right? They already were ignoring the laws on the books. So my suggestion to them would be like, hey, just work on enforcement against the bad landlords with the laws that are already existing in the books. We don't need to create more bureaucracy by passing more laws. Among a list of triggering actions, the new version states that if a tenant simply requests a repair, and then a landlord is prohibited from making management decisions like raising rent, refusing to renew a lease, or change any term of service for 1 year after that request is made. This is not limited to major maintenance problems. Almost every request for repair could trigger the prohibition. Multiple maintenance requests within a year are not uncommon, so the liability of this bill will often be continuous. So yeah, keep that in mind. So any maintenance request that a tenant makes, right, then the landlord could be charged with retaliation if they decide they need to evict this tenant. So, for example, like I've had multiple repairs, done at, let's say one of my houses had a water leak. I had to have all of the water pumped out of the basement, and I had to send in crew that could handle, dry out the foundation. Then afterwards, I ended up with some mold in the house. I had to get the mold repaired, and I didn't personally blame the tenant for that, right? But that very same tenant didn't pay me rent, and I was like, we have to file eviction against this person because this person's not paying me rent. Well, now that could be considered retaliation in the state of Illinois, and that's a big problem, okay? And the reason I bring these laws up, yeah, this is Illinois, but I've seen these anti-retaliation laws all over the place, okay? Not just in more left-leaning states, but also in the South and places that you wouldn't expect it normally, okay? Places that are supposed to be landlord friendly. So yeah, this could be a big issue for landlords throughout the entire country. And remember, states, they look at each other's, other states' laws, and then when they write their specific state law, they just kind of change the wording a little bit. But they're like, oh yeah, this worked in Illinois. Maybe we could try that here in Missouri, or maybe we could try that here in Nebraska, where I live, where I invest. So yeah, I don't think that these sort of laws will work, okay? But we've seen these laws passed before in places like California, and it is extremely detrimental to landlords. That's why I tell people don't even invest in that sort of place. The biggest problem with the bill is the presumption that the landlord is guilty of retaliation if they make any of the prohibited management decisions within the year after the request for maintenance is made. That's right, the landlord is assumed guilty unless they prove their innocence. The advocates argue that the presumption of guilt is okay because an innocent landlord is free to hire an attorney to prove their innocence. Thousands of dollars will be spent by housing providers who acted responsibly in response to requests for repairs and then made normal management decisions for their property. Yeah, but that's what they want. They want basically the landlords to say, well, I'm just not going to raise the rent. I'm just not going to evict any tenants. I'm just going to take these losses because it's cheaper doing that than fighting this in court. That's what they want. That's the whole point behind these laws, is to give the tenants a advantage over the landlords where the landlords are prohibited from raising the rent, right? So yeah, I hope that this law doesn't become a law. Okay, this is just a proposal, and that the property owners and the politicians in the state who still care about property rights fight against this sort of thing.